Story 1. Caught in the cycle, the blazing gold sun wanes in the sky over the still lake, its light rays coming down, touching the water and the land stretching beyond it as the wondrous bowl of light sinks into the horizon. Bushy-tailed deer frolic through the grassy plains, running across the dirt roads that which continue through thick woods. Chirping can be heard by any living thing near, as the local birds make their beds, preparing for the night. Within the woods, upon a single branch growing from the very top of a dead tree, lands a small bird with white feathers, a brown tail, and a black beak. Its dubious eyes watch as a bright pink paints the skyline, fading into orange. The little bird then looks nearby, the shore, a rocky border between the land and lake. Standing near this is a short, aging, wooden cabin, its windows cracked, doorknob rusted, and the oak roof even missing a plank of wood. In a spirited fashion, the bird flutters down to the top of the roof, peering through the space where the missing plank is, but like the woodland's ground, the inside of this structure is one of few places during the day where the sun's rays do not touch, where all beings accustomed to the shadows dwell within. One of these very beings hides from the bright lights of day in the corner, waiting for the light leaking through the hole to diminish. This creature is nothing like anything that lives within the woods, or in the trees, or even anything in the lake. It cuddles in the corner, silent as possible, until it looks at the light. The being crawls through the darkness, and next to the light, it moves with such unnatural speed a breeze of wind follows behind. Growling with anticipation, it looks with such readiness at the hole, and as soon as everything is void of light, the creature bursts through the door like a crazed rhino, with chips of wood flying in all directions, coming to a halt in the middle of the dirt road. The remarkably powerful creature gazes at the star-filled sky. Within the being, an excitement stirs, for this being, ever since its eternal life began, has not been driven by something as petty and meaningless to it like human endeavors. Instead, it is driven by its lust and hunger for blood. Searching for what it craves, it dashes through the tall grass and into the woods, leaving a cloud of dirt behind as it disappears in the darkness. The shore should be near here, the young biker wondered while he slowly rides upon the dirt roads, passing tree by tree, with a headlight to guide him through the night. His feet pedal with effort as he tightly grips the handlebars, bumping over tree roots, going faster along the narrow, dark path cutting through the woods. A cool night breeze brushes his smooth, freckled face, making his long brown hair fly past his ears. A drop of sweat gradually travels down from his forehead through his pearly beard and drips to his neon green jacket. His calm chocolate brown eyes fixate onto the light shining on the trail. But while the breeze stops, the heat of his heart, the pressure of his blood, and the adrenaline surge all become calm. His eyes wander to the starry night sky, a seemingly never-ending blanket of blackness, with individual light scattered everywhere. His long hair falls in front of his eyes, causing him to take a hand off of his handlebar so he can sort it out. Still looking up instead of forward, the trail dips into a large hill, and his eyes return to the road too late to react to the change. He and his bike in midair together as for a split second. Everything becomes slower to the biker. The stars twinkle as the breeze starts again, gradually becoming a strong blow of wind. He and the bike fall to feet into the ground, the bike worsening it with its hard metal hitting his legs with a pounding, aching pain in his ankle. He stands back up, his feet planted loosely into the ground. "Ooh, idiot," he exclaims with a flaming frustration in his voice, slapping his helmet instead of his forehead with his annoyance growing inside of him. He doesn't pay attention to the howling winds blowing through the woods, suddenly calming down again. The area becomes dead silent. Not a single living thing making a sound, as all he hears is his thoughts bouncing back and forth in his head. He bends down to put his bicycle back up while the intrusive thoughts grow rampant inside him. I should pay attention more, could have done some serious damage. He seats upon the cushion and places his uninjured foot onto the ground with his possibly fractured one on the left pedal. It feels like I should be back home by now. It's just so dark, and his brown eyes more comparable to the fur of a grizzly. He now attempts to focus on the trail once more, his head lamp out of place due to the aggravated slap, and as his eyes try to fixate, the darkness stretching ahead suddenly seems to surround him. Who cares about the friggin' time? Lines do what I want now. In 19, and my parents, a pulse of shock trembles his body as an outbird-like growl is heard. His thoughts now silent, the silence surrounding him once the noise ceases, just like the darkness. Just focus on the trail. Come on, you can do it. Hoping that this is his last thought, he resumes his journey on to the trail. His eyes return to a calm chocolate brown, fixating on to the trail as he speeds by the trees. In the distance, he can see a landscape covered by grass, ending at a cliff by the lake's shore. Now more determined than before, he teased towards his destination, his sweaty palms squeezing the life out of the handlebars, and his feet pedaling so fast that he believes it could be equal to a race horse galloping, a trusty steed racing through the night, its golden mane flowing behind him like it's underwater. This he would like to imagine as he races through the thick night with a powerful passion burning inside. He imagines himself as the horse again, this time with other horses 30 feet behind him, and as he speeds on the trail, the cold sweat going down his feet, one of the said horses seems to be closer than the others, so he rushes even more. He looks to his left to see the horse bolting as fast as him through the woods, a dark silhouette, but seemingly not very horse-like, almost human-shaped. The realization hits him. He stops dead like a broken-down car just 10 feet from the grassy plains. The feeling creeps up to him, each individual hair standing up, his heart beating faster. Yet for a different reason now. He leaves his bike lying in the dirt to possibly get a glimpse at the silhouette. Who's there? Why are you following me? But instead of a response, the silhouette stands on all fours, like a primitive man. A low-pitched noise originates from the silhouette, followed by an inhuman hiss. Carefully, it places a foot forward, closing on to the young biker. Like a lion stalking a deer, it walks around a tree, its head pointed towards the frightened man. "What the hell?" he whispers. "Is this some kind of prank, Eve?" And faster than any of the horses he imagined, the silhouette charges at him, acting between the split seconds where everything slows down. He lunges to where his bike is and attempts to pick it up, but he is quickly topped once 5 razor claws dig through the flesh of his leg, sinking all the way down to the very bone. He clenches the ground as he's dragged by the leg, which the creature shows little effort. RTN, while the biker struggles with every last strength his adrenaline can possibly grant. His heart like a wardroom, and his sweat drenching him, he truly gives all his might against the being. But resisting seems futile against the being, for it pulls with a certain mockery, like a child playing with its food. And just as his gullible human mind fully believes that this is the worst it could get, the creature leaps with immense power onto a tree, clinging to the wood with its claws, carrying him into the tree-tops, where no one would think to look. The leaves of the tree shake as his muffled screams draw attention to animals nearby, for the being, while it may seem feral and mindless, is rather tidy as it feasts, as only a single drop of blood manages to escape and runs down between the bark, splashing onto the fertile ground. Moments later, the biker's dying, deathly pale body lies on a sturdy tree branch, with the creature on top of him, moaning with his last br. He looks at the being with little life left in his eyes. The creature tilts its head in a judgmental manner. Then a low-pitched growl comes from the being's mouth, but the growl seemingly resembles words, as if it's saying, "You are perfect." The world fades away into a darkness more powerful than the night sky. Fading into a playground, the biker walks by the swing set, and with each step, the ground behind dissolves into nothingness, and as he looks behind his shoulder, one of the metal swings delivers a powerful blow to the back of his head, making him plummet into emptiness, fallings and falling as if it will never stop, but yet it does once he crashes through roof of a burning home. He falls to the basement, engulfed in flames, the fire eating away the structure. He into nothing, he yells in terror, but nothing comes out. Suddenly, something slimy slithers over his belly. A large cobra, and with it are many other species of snakes surrounding his feet. They wrap around his legs, pulling him down into the flames. One by one, they slither onto him, until everything but his eye is covered by snakes. The flames then slowly envelop him, the scorching heat burning. The reptiles, a cobra lunging at him, is the last of what he sees before it all fades into a whiteness. Abruptly breathing, he awakens to a similar whiteness, whilst leaning on something hard, and the whiteness turns into an impossibly bright ball of light shining behind the leaves of trees in the woods. Forcing him to cover his eyes with his arm, he slowly stands up, letting out a groan, but what comes from his vocal cords is far different from what he intended to come out. Instead, what did come out is a high-pitched screech. Suddenly, the whole woodlands erupts with noises of its inhabitants, birds fluttering, chipmunks squeaking, deer walking, coyotes sniffing, all pounding his eardrums all at once. The young man crawls deeper into the shade of the tree, covering his ears. Then, just like that, the scorching ball of light and the noises cease. He becomes surrounded by a thick whitish blue. He looks down at his hands and sees dark brown claws where his fingernails used to be, and his complexion now a paler shade of what it used to be. What the shit happened to me? As he gasps at his strange features, a noddle, why repetitive sound smacks his eardrums, a singular heartbeat, a heartbeat that is getting closer and closer. He turns his head to where it's originating from, and he sees a woman holding a flashlight, walking on the dirt trail. He does not care for what she looks like or who she is. He is only concerned about that attractive, repeating sound coming from her. With unexpected strength and speed he lunges at the unsuspecting woman, pinning her to the ground as her screams echo through the crispy night air. The creature who was once a man bellows an unearthly roar, its eyes piercing a defenseless woman. Its jaw stretches down to its collar, bone similar to a snake, as teeth comparable to a lioness unsheath from his gums. And while her muffled screams continue throughout the darkness, a final shred of humanity deteriorates within the creature. Reduced to an instinctive thirst for blood, it feasts onto the woman with joy. And as the being prowls the night, nature has once again and completed a constant cycle, for man has crossed the unknown, and then the unknown hunts man, then man becomes the unknown. A circle of death and bloodshed that has echoed throughout the centuries. Story 2. It always began to stalk as dusk drew to a close. I should begin with trying to define it, but there are no words as to what it really is. It is an unfathomable object, a three-dimensional, hundred-sided object with no faces, like an optical illusion. On the numerous occasions I saw it, the creature seemed to change before my eyes, but when I looked again to see if it was still there, it was the same a third glance, perhaps, and it would be different. There was no reasonable explanation, no logical conclusion I could jump to as to what it was, but it always came. It never missed a night, not once in over 2 years. Even when I was out, maybe crashing at a friend's or working the late shift, I could still see it, or what I thought was it. After my mind was touched by this creature's filthy hands, the very shadows seemed to look different, as if they too were hiding something. It came into my life a little over 2 years ago. I had just moved out into a one-bedroom, one-bathroom apartment on the second floor of a 3-story building. The top floor for shut-off, apparently leased by some private medicinal company who had done nothing why. It was located in a neighborhood where most of the residents who could afford to move out had already done so. It was a little run down. However, it was the most I could afford, a special. Why, balancing work and university. At first I didn't notice anything out of the ordinary, but I did not spend much time in my apartment, as finals were approaching and I was mostly on campus, in the library, at work, or at a friend's place. The only time I ever returned was to sleep, eat, and make sure no one had broken in. In the second month of living there, I came back one chilly evening, hoping it would not rain. Ominous black rain clouds had threatened all day, but knowing my luck, they'd open up with marble-sized raindrops the minute I was in the open. My luck held, fortunately, and I got into my apartment without getting soaked. As I pulled off my shoes, I noticed one had a dark substance on the bottom. I sighed, thinking it was dog mess. However, it was congealing, and it looked more crimson than brown. I touched it with a finger, and it stuck fast. I attempted to shake it off, but it did not move. I wiped it back on my shoe and left it there. I had better things to do, and hopefully on the walk to university tomorrow, the damp grass would wipe it off. In hindsight, I should have dumped the shoe as far as I possibly could and run, but now that is irrelevant. I rose the next morning, tired. I had bags under my eyes, and my nose was completely blocked. It was a curious sensation, as usually I could still smell some scents, but I could smell absolutely nothing. I shrugged it off as a bug, took an aspirin, and got ready for university, a small bag, phone, books, and a pen. As I bent down to put on my shoes, I saw the substance had gone. I frowned, and sure if I had dealt with it, I decided I was going a little crazy and must have cleaned the shoe and forgotten in my haste. I pulled the shoe on and went to university, returned to get change for work, and left again. I did not return until the next morning to get cleaned and changed, and it was then I noticed the atrocious smell somewhere between rotting meat and the public toilet that was down the street from my apartment. I opened the door, and wretched, the smell had perforated every single item, every molecule of air than it possibly could, and it had ruined all my personal items. I felt furious, but also a little apprehension as to what could have caused such an unnatural smell in just over a day. As I investigated, it seemed to lessen and disappear. I smelled all my clothes and bed sheets. Nothing remained of the putrid stench, and I put it down to a passing smell. It was that night I got my first glimpse of it. I woke. I had no reason to. I could feel a presence, something watching me. I carefully clicked the lamp on. Nothing. I decided to get up to run myself a glass of water, and it was there. I stopped dead in my tracks. It was standing, and the key chain at the bench. It turned towards me, and I stood there, shocked. It took a step towards me, and I stood there, bewildered. At this point it looked vaguely humanoid, and I assumed it was a burglar. I snapped out of the trance and looked around for anything that I could defend myself with. I found my torch. My father gave it to me as a present when I was 18. It was solid, half a.m., meter long, and more like a baton than a torch. I clicked the torch on, and it gave an inhuman screech. And that was when I first knew it wasn't human. I wondered how the neighbors didn't hear it, but I assumed it was blocking the noise. It ran at me, colliding, and clumsily reached for the torch. I tightened my grip, trying to bash it, but it had strength in those seemingly skinny arms. As I looked at the torch, then back at the creature, it changed. It was now covered in fur, matted, oily fur, and was more ape, with thicker arms and legs. It wrestled the torch away from me, click-toe, F the light, and lay a delicate finger under my chin. His game with that, it disappeared. I woke the next morning in bed with blood dripping from a wound on my head. I did not recall getting it. However, it was definitely there. I bandaged it and took a painkiller before trying to recall what it was that earned me the cut. I could not remember the creature that had invaded my home. As I went on through the day, feeling more and more tired with each passing moment, the wound started to burn. I constantly scratched it, but only succeeded in inflaming the cut. I returned home fully intending just to crash in bed when the wound stopped hurting and the tiredness disappeared. The air in the apartment seemed stale, and I sensed a presence, but there was no one there. I made myself a quick dinner and retired. I woke again. The wound was throbbing, almost unbearably so. I got up, stumbling to the kitchen, mind focused solely on getting painkillers. It was there again. It now had a shorter body, only one arm, and a head with two faces. It grinned, a leering gesture that shook me to my soul, and I fled, instinctively knowing it meant me harm. There was no point. It caught me every day. for over 2 years. It would hunt me, put a finger under my chin, and grunt his game. After over 2 years of this, I was almost mentally unsoul. N.D. I stopped working as frequently. My body was covered in more lacerations than I could count. My friends stopped inviting me over so regularly, as I always seemed to wake screaming. My grades dropped, and eventually I failed the course. So much for becoming a psychologist. Even though I could not recall the creature at all, I had the feeling of unease, of fear that was so close to the surface. I'll not face darkness, but darkness always fell. The night lights failed, the torches' batteries stopped working, and the power went out. Darkness became the only certainty in my life until 2 days ago. As always, the feeling of injury and tiredness, even depression, went away as I entered my apartment. I went straight to bed, trying to hide. It did not work. It came again, this time impossibly tall and thin, with bizarrely pointing knees and elbows. As it did what it did best, my door opened. One of my neighbors, a hard woman, who had grown up as an orphan in an orphanage where they constantly beat up and stole to gain status. She saw it saw her. I fell unconscious, and when I woke, she was gone. There was a pool of blood where she had stood, and something else. I could remember it. That leads me to today. Yesterday it did not come. As I write this, I know it is coming. I can feel it, somehow, like we have a bond. I suppose after all I've suffered, we do have a bond, made of hate and diluted rage, and countless hours of fear and pain. I have a plan. If it goes wrong, I am dead. I called my parents one more time to tell them I love them, and although they seemed slightly confused about getting their weekly call a day early, but if it goes well, I may just rid myself of this curse. The plan lies next to me. I purchased it today. It is a 9mm pistol of Smith & Wesson design. The rest I do not care about. It is a pistol, and hopefully it can kill it. It draws closer. I can sense it. It wants me to fall asleep, to let it wake me. But not tonight. Tonight I am stayed wide awake. It is anxious. I can feel it. It doesn't understand why I'm not asleep, but it's curious. It wants to know why I am not frightened tonight. It is clever. I caught a glimpse of it, but it disappeared instantly. It is baiting me. It is cautious. I did not react, but it fears a trap. Time is running out. The sun rises at 6:46. I checked. It has less than 20 minutes. It is here. I rise, instinctively knowing it is behind me. I have made sure the gun is loaded, and the safety is off. I fire once, twice, 3 times. It stumbles back and runs for the door. The wood splinters, and it howls in pain. I manage a grin, tight and forced. I am paying it back for what it gave me. I fire another 5 times into its back. With this creature, the back is the front is the side, and the side is nothing. I am not sure what I am shooting, but I am hurting it. All at once it turns, cheese out with its foot, and I go falling to the floor. It hisses and drags itself to me. I fumble for the pistol as it raises its hand, now a razor-sharp talon. I fire and it slashes. It screeches again. Lick. The time I use light against it, and the light goes out of its eyes. It is over. The world starts to go black. I wake. I can feel it. It is not dead. I open my eyes. Several people in biohazard suits are leaning over it. It is hurt badly. Commander, he did some serious damage. One says, terminate the project. Release version 2. It is already fully formed, correct? Another says, yes, sir. It is, as you command, sir. One of them looked at me. What about this one, sir? He asks the commander. The commander walks over to me, and I play dead. Let him be. He's the son of a teacher and a lawyer. I doubt anyone will inquire too much into his health. They'll think him to be crazy. As you command, sir. The first says there is a charging sound like the 9mm, but much deeper. I open my eyes a smidge and watch them walk up, 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 up. The third story, of course, leased to a medical company. Doing experiments with ungodly things, I stay there for what seems like an eternity. As I start to get up, the locked door to the third story opens again. An impossible figure slips out. It is like a three-dimensional, 100-sided object with no faces. It runs, bent, predatory, without so much as a look at me. It changes, goes under the door of the apartment next to mine. Not the old woman's, the newer tenant, the teenage girl. I get up shakily, wiping my eyes. I didn't even realize I was crying. I go to knock on the door of her apartment. And then I think. I back away from the apartment. It is her problem now, not mine. Stowe. Re-3, the carnival. Hey, Ashley, look, there's a flyer for a carnival. It's in town and not that far from here. A carnival? Isn't that kind of childish, Ashley? How long have we been dating? Everything about me is childish. Plus, I bet it'll make for a great date. Heh. Yeah, you are childish, Jake. But if you think it'll make for a great date, then I don't to you for a second. So far, every date you've taken me on has been great. My name's Jacob, but most people call me Jake. Standing next to me is my girlfriend of 3 years, Ashley. We met in freshman year of high school, started dating in sophomore year. Now we're close to graduating senior year. I have been trying to set up the perfect date to finally propose to her. But this town is small and boring. But hearing of a carnival in town may make for a great date. She's not that into childish things, but so far I've managed to show her being childish isn't bad. I know she enjoys herself with Emmy. It's weird, though. The location of this carnival is located near the forest, close to the train tracks. Well, it is a small town, and we don't have large buildings or land for them to set up everything. So the forest area was probably their only option. I glanced my eyes over the flyer once more. I guess I was looking for any hints of what might be at the carnival. But all that was shown on the flyer was the name of it and a few clowns and those masks you see at plays, you know, the joy and sadness ones. I reach out and grasp Ashley's hand. I smile at her and she returns it with one of her amazing smiles. I can't help but get giddy whenever I see her smile at me like that. Let's go find that carnival and get us some tickets, yeah. I asked her this, trying to contain my own excitement. If this date went perfectly like I was hoping it would, I be popping her the big question at the end of night. She grips my hand tightly and gives me a confident nod. I swore I could see her eyes light up with excitement. Even though she says she's not childish, I'm pretty sure she's excited to go. I mean, I know I am. I love carnivals. We walk to the car and I slide into TH, he driver's seat, while she goes around to the passenger's side and slides in. Next to me, I offer her a smile and start the engine, backing up before I began to drive off to our new destination. I had to use my phone to Google the location of the forest since the directions were kinda crappy on the flyers, but it wasn't hard to find. Once we had hit the edge of the forest, we could hear the music and the laughter of children and even their parents. I smiled wide as my excitement grew, and I looked over to Ashley, who looked rather excited as well. We climbed out of the car, got close, grabbed each other's hands, and made our way forward. I was trying to find out where I could buy the tickets, but one of the clowns simply shook their index finger in my face and stated that the carnival was free and all we had to pay for was the food and games. Now that I didn't mind, since food and games weren't that expensive at events like this, we walked forward. Hand in hand, we saw so many different people and even animals. We ate a few hot dogs and played a few games. Once we felt like we were done playing, we saw most of the people had started to gather round a large tent. We looked to one another and nodded before we walked towards the tent as well, hand in hand. I wonder what's going to be going on in here, Ashley asked. I simply replied with, maybe there will be acts in here. There are usually acts at carnivals. Ashley just nodded at me. Once we got to the entrance of the tent, there stood a young lady dressed in a black and blue corset with a black and blue tutu. Her face was painted up like a sea loons, and she smiled at us. She handed us each a ticket. Keep hold of those tickets. At the end of the show, the ringleader will be calling out the numbers on tickets. 3 lucky winners will get a chance to meet with him in private and get a few prizes and much, much more. I smiled widely. As a child, I had always been interested with clowns, circuses, carnivals, all those things. They always seemed so fun and like there were no cares in the world. So obviously, if we get our numbers called, you bet we will be going. What better way to propose than being with fun people like carnies? Once we had a seat, it seemed like everything got dark. Lights shone up above, and standing on a tight rope was what looked like a tall man. He was tall and lanky. He wore a top hat and a stitched-up looking suit. His belt had those drama masks attached to them, the happy and sad masks. His hands are what stood out the most, though. It was like his fingers were replaced with metal claws. Weird. I wonder if he purposely did that to fit in with the whole carny feel. Make himself stand out, I mean. He was tall enough to stand out with that alone. He could have been at least 7 feet tall or taller. He raised his hand and did what looked like a sidestep along the rope before he stopped again. He held his hands out, and before anyone could see, suddenly there were what looked like wool wooden dolls hanging from his claws. They hung in the air attached to strings that were attached to his claws. He bowed and introduced himself. Welcome, one and all. I am just the ringmaster of this wonderful carnival you have come to. I hope you all have been enjoying what we have offered. I hope we can entertain you much more before the night ends. Please, I'd like to introduce to you my favorite friends. Here he was, introducing the dolls. One was a man and one was a woman. The man was moved in a way that made him look like he was bowing and waving. Hello, I'm Will, the male doll said with a rather high-pitched voice. And I'm E, the female said. with an even higher-pitched voice. People clapped and waved, children cheering and yelling out their hellos to Jester and his dolls. Over the course of the entire show, Jester told jokes. Once his act was done, we got to see a strong man whose partner looked like an actual monster. I thought, why circuses did those things. I highly doubt she was a real monster and probably just wore a lot of makeup and accessories. But the strong man lifted her up with one hand easily, while in his other hand he held something that looked rather heavy. A lot of the items that were used in the show were things I've never seen in my life. I couldn't name one item they had in their show except for the usual circus items. At the end of the show, everyone cheered and applauded. Jester came back out, but this time he was on the ground. He had his hat off, and it looked like he was digging. In it, he pulled out a few pieces of papers and smiled up at everyone. As you all know, we have given everyone small tickets with numbers on them. The numbers that get called get the chance to experience even more fun with us personally backstage. Doesn't that sound fun, everyone? Everyone cheered. But for some reason my chest tightened. Suddenly I didn't really want my new recalled. I felt scared. Why? I'm not sure why. But I guess all the acts just... No, it wasn't the acts. It was Jester. Something about him was off. Even his crew seemed off. It was like they were hiding their true feelings, as if their joy was fake. Suddenly, what I heard next made my heart sink. The numbers. It was mine and Ashley's numbers. 320 and 410. Those numbers I hadn't bothered to look at till I heard him call them out. I looked at the tickets to see it was really our numbers. Ashley looked like she hadn't noticed anything was off. In fact, she was having a blast, like I knew she would. Come on, Jay, let's go. She said this with excitement, grabbing my hand and pulling me along with her as we made our way to the ground level. We were so close to him, Jester. He was so tall, it was scary. Actually, I swallowed hard and smiled up at him. He smiled back down at us, but his smile was so genuine that it creeped me out. He led us to the back. Him and Ashley made conversation. The thought of proposing to her completely left my mind. All I could think of was making sure he didn't hurt Ashley somehow. Jester stopped in his tracks. We were far from the other people. He offered us drinks. Ashley took hers and eagerly drank it. Throughout the entire event there was food, but no drinks. Till now I was dying of tea. Hers, so naturally I took a sip of it. But it felt cold and metallic. I also noticed I wasn't clothed. Where was Ashley, though? Where was she? Oh God, Sunadora. Enid. It looks like I'm stuck in a train car. The one who just entered the car is Jester. He smiled at me so genuinely once again. I felt a chill go down my spine when I noticed blood on him. Oh God, oh fuck. He walked towards me and asked, "Did you sleep well? You were out for a few days. Your lady friend woke up before you did, so I had fun with her first." What did this bastard mean by that? Did he hurt Ashley? Was that her blood on him? I'll fucking kill him. I struggled to get free, but I couldn't. The straps were too strong. I glanced CD up at him, and he smiled. He ran one of his metallic claws down my chest and stomach. Then, that's when it started. He started to dig his sharp claw into my flesh. I could feel him digging into my stomach and pee, hulling his hand upwards to cut me open. I started screaming. crying even, full walk. I screamed out and attempted to thrash and get away, but I just couldn't. Is this how I'm going to die? Why did I insist on coming here? All I wanted was to make Ashley smile. I just wanted fun memories with her, and now we're both dead. There's no escape. How could I be so tid ... Jester gripped my face and made me lock eyes with him. He smiled widely at me and said quietly, as if it were a secret for only me and him to share, "I sure hope you enjoyed yourself. Why, lay you could, 'cause the next time I hit the stage, you'll be joining me in the next act, huh?" I don't understand. I glanced around the rooms till I saw them. His dolls. So that's why they looked so real. They were real. They were once living, breathing human beings just like me at one point. And they fell prey to this man as well. I closed my eyes, trying to ignore the pain, but it was too much. He just kept cutting and digging into me. Eventually the pain stopped, and I couldn't feel anything. I felt cold. I could feel the life forty. NG from me ... Oh, how I wish I could see Ashley just one more time. The day ended. Everyone went home, except for 2 teenagers that had later been reported missing. The carnival left as quickly as it had came, going on to the next town. Story 4. Lower. It was almost 3 o'clock in the morning when something woke Leah up. She stayed in bed for a few groggy minutes, warm beneath the familiar our blankets. For the last 3 days, an enormous rain storm had been falling on the island of Kai, bringing an unusual chill along with it. The rain smacked against the window panes relentlessly. Leah had grown used to its noise, so it was something else that had disturbed her, and she knew she'd never get back to sleep until she figured out exactly what it was. With a reluctant sigh, she sat up in bed and looked around. The light her bedroom was filled with strange shadows, and a stark light she hadn't recognized right away. The new security light Adon, her brother-in-law, had put in for her just before the storm. Nobody had come by, and Leah had done a thorough job of making sure she had enough supplies to last out the bad weather. She'd never seen it switch on at night before. It was probably the wind pushing something into the garden that had triggered it. The system was supposed to shut itself off after 3 minutes. She wondered how long she'd been awake and watched the clock tick 1 minute after another, for then 5. The light stayed on. Hayden wasn't known for his amazing skills at electrical installation. Under normal circumstances, Leah would have insisted on hiring unless you were afraid of having to listen to hippies talk about carving gourds. Leah's nearest neighbors were a 15-minute drive away, and that's how she liked it. She didn't even have a paved driveway. Who, she wondered, would bother to go all the way out to her place to commit a crime? It was smarter to head to the coast and heck up the big town. She cursed and grumbled as she got out of bed, shivering in her shorts and long-sleeve tee. It was even colder than she thought it would be. The floor was like ice beneath her bare feet. She stepped quick and lightly to the window, hugging herself for warmth, and tried to crane her head to see where the security light was mounted. The rain was making a mess of her view, homing down in thick streaks that made the outside world look like it was twisting around in a crystal decanter. A shape moved at the corner of her eye. Her heart pounded for a second or 2. Then calmed as she looked into her driveway. Standing little ways to the side of her car was a figure. It looked like a girl with bright red hair, pinned up in the style of a surf bunny from the days of Frankie and Annette. She was wearing a long, floral print dress and standing right in the middle of the pouring rain. She was too far away and the weather was too bad for Leah to make out her features as she watched the girl in the driveway, looked right up at the bedroom window and waved a slow, robotic hello. The tiny hairs on Leah's arms stood up and she ducked away from the window. She took a few deep breaths. Fine. The girl was there because her car had broken down or she had some other kind of trouble. And she knew that somebody was home because Leah's car was right there beside her, or maybe she assumed that somebody had manually turned the outside light on. But how could she have known exactly where Leah was? The room was dark. The security light was too bright and distracting. And there were other windows on the second floor. How had she known exactly which one Leah was standing at? Calming herself, telling herself there was probably an innocent explanation for it all, Leah glanced out the window again. The girl was still there, waiting. She looked young and delicate, like a teenager. There were all kinds of warnings and emergency procedures being declared because of the storm, and 2 of the nearby roads were flooded. Leah knew she'd never forgive herself if that girl was in need of help, and she left her stranded. Shaking the doubts from her mind, Leah decided to make her way downstairs. She tried not to think of the girl's eerie wave. She tried to rationalize the strangeness of the shadows. Both the car and the small palm tree had cast long, deep shadows from the stark white light on top of the lanai. The girl didn't have any shadow at all. But that could have been something to do with the angle, or a trick of the rain. The weather had blurred so many details, it was hard for Leah to be sure of anything she saw. Just as her foot touched the bottom stair, the sound of the knock filled the house, a rhythmic slamming against the front door. In no way gentle or persuasive, it was loud, startlingly so, and strangely hollow. An angry demand, very unlike the way Leah would have expected the girl she saw to knock. She tried to tell herself that her nerves were skewing things, making her edgy, and there was no need to be. Maybe it had been a loud knock because the girl was feeling desperate, wanted to be sure that the people inside heard her. But then, why hadn't she used the doorbell instead? Maybe there was someone else with her, and Leah simply hadn't been let to see them from the window. That changed things. That was a rational concern. What if there was a boyfriend? Someone big, strong, and threatening. Leah hurried into the kitchen and got herself a knife, nothing big or menacing like one of the butcher's knives on the posters for horror movies. Just a small paring knife. Very sharp, the kind of thing that was guaranteed to hurt a ma. And if you wanted him hurt, or stop him if he needed stopping. For the first time since moving out of the city, she regretted the seclusion she'd chosen. She'd take all the airplane flyovers, traffic noise, and petty crime in the world to feel less vulnerable. The knock sounded again with such urgency that Leah could feel the vibrations of it inside her bones. She made herself think of flood, roads, stranded people, medical emergencies. With the knife at her side, she went to her front door and stood with her hand resting on the knob. Part of her was screaming to forget it, to go back upstairs and lock herself in her room until morning, but she couldn't. In a quick, defiant motion, she swung the front door open and looked out into the pouring rain. No one was here. "Hello," Leah called, stepping carefully onto the lanai. "Is somebody out here? Do you need help?" She made her way forward very carefully, adjusting her grip on the knife handle. The rain was fierce and deafening, cold splashes of it coiling around her naked ankles like ocean spray. Everything smelled drowned and muddy. There was no sign of anyone, not even a set of footprints in the softened earth of the driveway. Leah stepped to the very edge of the outside steps and took one last look around. "I'm going back inside," she called, her voice quivering more than she would age. Ave liked as she turned. The front door slammed shut and shook the floor of the lanai. The security light snapped off so quickly it was as if the bulb had suddenly burnt out. Leah sprang towards the closed door and twisted frantically at the knob, but it wouldn't turn. Impossible. The only way to lock the door was from the outside. She hadn't even had a deadbolt put in. Finally, the door relented and swung open, as though there hadn't been any resistance at all. Leah dashed inside and slammed it shut behind her. The house felt empty and full at the same time. The grayness of the rainy night settled on the familiar rooms in front of her like a layer of dust. She knew that the house had to be searched. Somebody could have been hiding close to the wall and ducked in when she was looking at the driveway. It took her a few moments, standing in the empty front room with the soft drumbeat of the rain mingling with the pounding of her heart, before she felt bold enough to do it. When she found no one, she began to relax. She ended the search in the kitchen and decided to pour herself a glass of water and check her phone, just to be safe. She'd send a message to her sister, nothing to worry her, just something to let her know about the girl in the driveway. She put the paring knife down on the counter and picked up her phone. No bars and no Wi-Fi. The storm had been upsetting service on and off for the last few days. Leah tried not to think of it as isolation. It was just a nuisance. Her imagination was playing tricks on her. When morning came, she would lounge at herself and spend another cozy day curled up and watching whatever was saved on the DVR. A razor-thin breeze whistled by her ear when she went to get a glass from the cupboard. There was a sound like nothing she'd heard before, a sharp, reverberating thud. Something had hit the cupboard door while she held it open. Slowly, nervously, she closed it to see what it had been. The paring knife was sticking out of the door, as though it had been thrown. Leah turned. The kitchen was bright, well lit, and empty. She grabbed the phone off the counter and hurried upstairs to the bedroom. She would throw on some flip-flops and proper clothes, grab her keys, and get the hell out. The goat ranch up the road was owned by two very friendly retirees. She was certain that they would help her. There was no guarantee that the roads would be clear, probably covered in water and debris, maybe even a fallen tree, some parts too muddy to drive on, but she had to try. Her feet almost slipped on the hardwood stairs as she hurried to change. Nothing dramatic, just enough to feel like she wasn't driving through a rainstorm in her underwear. She grabbed a pair of jeans off the closet floor and pulled them on, her back to the window. As she did, the room filled with the pale white light that had woken her up less than an hour before. The security HT coming to life once more. She didn't want to turn around and look out the window, but she made her body move to where she could look out and see. There was no red-headed girl, but the light stayed on. Calmly, Leah slipped on her flip-flops and headed into the hall. She breathed steadily, stepped carefully. The house was colder than it should have been. At the top of the stairs, the smell of rain and boggy, wet earth was pungent and overwhelming. Leah swallowed hard, steadied herself. It would be a difficult drive to the neighbors. She wouldn't make it if she was in a panic. But when she got to the middle of the staircase, she couldn't control the surge of dread that overtook her. The front door was wide open. The security light caught the falling rain, casting patterned shadows on the floor. Leah braced herself and headed straight for the door. She would run right for the car and jump in, without any kind of hesitation. She made for the lanai, but something at the corner of her eye, in the dusk-gray shadows of the living room, moved. Leah froze. She couldn't help herself. She turned to look. The red-headed girl was standing there, her head tilted one side. This closed, Leah could notice things she hadn't been able to see from the upstairs window, like the black dirt under the girl's fingernails, the disarray of the orderly hairstyle, the rips and stains on the long floral dress. "I'm sorry." The girl looked over her shoulder, as though she were expecting someone else to step out of the shadows behind her. The security light switched off. Story 5. The terror of Cambigan. On certain quiet nights under the watchful gaze of a full moon, one could hear surreptitious moans, half manlike and half swine, in the dead air of Baranga. Why Cambigan? In the hill regions of Buena Vista near the border to Inabanga, both townships in the province of Bahal. It is an ancestral place to me and my kin, whose virgin soul lay barely touched by the ravenous kiss of progress. Much lay unknown about the dense woodlands of Bahal, and lesser still in the snake-ridden and cave-lined hills of Campigan. What secrets her intertwined limestone caves, and dense canopies of palm trees and brooding mango overheads, none could tell. For farmers never stray past the hours of darkness, when the moon hangs high above the night sky and the evening cold stings the skin, and little merriment can be found, even from the drunken squalor, though all was not such in conservative Campigan. For no more than 5 years ago, before the great earthquake of 213, it was a bustling port for the Thursday markets, when the hill folks come down to trade their wares. Now buses scarcely come at all, save for weekends when young folk would return from the sit. Yes, and the Thursday markets opens in neighboring Bugdong. What happened, as conveyed to me by the squalid denizens of Campigan in their thatch-roofed nipa huts, was that during those first few weeks after October, when the mighty earthquake struck, strange things began to happen, the first of which was the arrival of an innumerable host of snakes, who sprang forth from the limestone caves and meter-long fault lines left by the earthquake's wake. The woodlands had become so terribly choked with serpents that one could barely tread the makeshift roads without risking a venomous bite. The next to come was the beginning of the alien vocal choirs of strange toads never heard before, or at the very least the majority of them thought they were toads. It began on a November night, when the cold winds started blowing, when the first of the alien toads sang their cacophonous melody. The strangeness lie in the auditory character of how these toads sounded and still sound, for it is a horrendous amalgamation between the squealing of pigs and screaming of man. Of these toads, no physical evidence seemed to have presented itself, but wild claims from the country folk speak of a nightmarish origin of these sounds, one of which was Manung Reuben, a hillside decadent who bespoke of a primitive age. He used to climb the hills and search caves at night to hound for python meat. The story conveyed to me was far beyond believable, yet the evidence and connection between events were less disputable. For after a fortnight, when the strange sounds began, mysterious disappearances also started taking place. At first, it was chickens and cats that failed, returned to their respective homes. Then dogs started disappearing. No sooner did their goats and cattle disappear like the rest, no trace was ever left of the missing animals, and all cases happened when a cave was nearby. After a month of silent terror, the first human disappearance took place. It was on a dying day, just before twilight. Manung Susing had her son pick up wood for fire in the backyard thicket. Not far from that wood, it should be noted, was a limestone cave, roughly 1.5 meters in diameter, situated on a small hill rise located near a fault line. Manung Susing, as she claimed, waited for her son to return, but late evening came and she grew restless and finally informed the neighbors of his disappearance. The men formed a search party with local deputies in the dead of night, carrying their electric torches and cutlasses, but found no trace of the missing child. At first, authorities blamed the sudden surge of serpents for the disappearance of the boy. Perhaps an overgrown python had found him easy prey. So for weeks they overturned stones, searched the mouths of caves, beat down bushes, and climbed up trees, in vain search for the giant snake and its child victim. While all this happened, 10 more cattle disappearances raised a certain degree of alarm within the farmer folk. 2 months on, and an aftershock shook the hillside town at 2 a.m. In the morning, they discovered a new limestone cave had formed near the local stone quarry, and at the same time 8 more cattle disappearances were reported. After the discovery of the cave, every night since the strange sounds grew strong and louder, the terror came to a seemingly abrupt end by January, with no more reported farmstead disappearances and a noted dying down of the hideous sounds. The denizens were all too eager to forget the nightly terrors, but Manung Susing had to be moved back to her family home in Tobeggan. Crop yields were normal that summer, and no other abnormalities save for the ever-increasing presence of snakes was noted. But by June of the next year, the horror returned with a sudden start and reached its zenith, when a group of 12 quarry workers disappeared after an overtime shift that saw itself well into the dead of night. No trace of them remained, except that the barren lime road was trampled and squashed into mud, as if trodden on by a stampede of cows, though no cloven hoof ever suggested itself on the soft soil. All the while, every denizen in Cambigan swore that the terrible baying and croaking of the unseen things sounded the loudest on the night the men disappeared. By this time, devilry was suspected, and the old mancuculum witch doctor was brought into question. He suspected the works of fairies and other such fantastic nightmares that plague Filipino mythology, while the desperate and frightened farmer Folk were quick to point fingers at whatever their wild imaginations saw fit to blame. Others agreed with the mancuculum, while others, like old Manong Donio, blamed it on the snakes, Manangrencha. On the other hand, who grew up from older Inabanga, saw fit to connect the events to the archaic story of the giant catfish under the old St. Paul's Parish church in her old hometown, which the earthquake had brought ruin to. Undoubtedly, the underground limestone cave which connected to the Inabanga River had been affected in more ways than one. Indeed, Manangrencha's stories convinced some of the older folk, what with the strange noises about that they could compare to the low growlo of a catfish. But Cambigan is far high uphill, and questions of catfish inland were immediately ridiculed by the more educated neighbors. However, none could place exactly what is making those nocturnal sounds and what is causing the disappearances. By then, Manong Reuben arrived from neighboring Bugtong, who likewise felt the tremors of last year's October. He had apparently heard from local news that Cambigan was experiencing a sort of boom in its ophidian population, and resolved himself to visit to quench his hunger for pythons. The serpent, being a sort of local delicacy, was found to be very abundant in the region. Needless to say, Manong Reuben had little difficulty in finding his catch, and on the first day caught a bounty enough to feed him and his neighbors for weeks, since Cambigan was but half an hour's trip on motorcycle from Bugtong. Manong Reuben found himself on daily trips to and from the haunted region. After a time, he had made friends with the farmers who were plagued still by the disappearances of their animals. He has heard of the queer stories of the nightly songs of unimaginable horrors, and the complete disappearances of their teen people, one of which was a child. He himself had not heard the baying and the moaning of the man-like swine squealing, since he had never tried to stay later after twilight. Then, by September, a considerably strong earthquake, though of less magnitude than the one from last year, rocked both Inabanga and Buena Vista. The earthquake found Manong Reuben homeless, reducing his concrete bungalow to rubble. He was, at the time, hunting for python and Cambigan when the earth began to rumble. He hurried home and found his lodgings in a desolate manner. Neighbors were in no better shape without a family to go to. Manong Reuben resolved to live with a month's-old friend from Cambigan who relished his company. This way he needn't drive up half an hour, Philip, every day to find his catch, and the folks of Cambigan were the kind who'd enjoy queer local meals. It was on the third week when Manong Reuben resolved to hunt for the suspected giant serpent. After a second child disappeared into the woods. The child was from a family who hailed from urban Tagbilaran, apparently visiting relatives. She had been playing near the woods, close to one of Cambigan's many limestone caves at sunset. After an unrewarding search for the missing child and the vindicated culprit, all efforts were dropped. The local deputies were all too quick to call it the work of an oversized snake. Though none was ever found, Reuben himself believed the serpent theory and resolved to find the culprit. He deduced from his years of experience as a snake trapper that he could find it when it was most active, and from the locals' tales of disappearances near the caves, he had come up with an idea of where the thing lurked. So, on a humid evening, he set out with an electric torch, his cutlass and a revolver, and dived deep into the caverns that riddled across Cambigan. Manon Rubin, at this point, was obscure in telling his story. He claimed that the next few hours of walking, in pitch black, aided by the torchlight and bridled with courageous zeal, was like a lucid dream. As the night waned on, he realized that the sound came from no devil toad of the outside, but originated deep in the belly of the caves. As he trudged onward, the baying grew louder and louder. It must have been hours that he walked on, for his torch started to grow dim. When at last he had reached the point where the sound had seemed to have come from, by now his conveyance of the story was choppy and unclear. At first, he said, he could see nothing, for his torch had become so dim that he could only see what was directly in front of him. Then, as he stared into the distance much longer and his eyes started to adjust to the meager light his torch flashed, he screamed. What he saw in that cave he could only describe was a blasphemous horde of flesh and teeth. They were loping, moly, maggot gorillas with pink leather skin and a mouth of sharpened teeth. They had no face, their heads mounting a singular mouth which drooled and gasped. They walked on fours and sometimes on twos and gnawed and bit at each other. It was an orgy of unbridled cannibalism, of organic corruption, and the twisted evil side of evolution. They bayed and growled, croaked and moaned, and squealed like a pig-man or a man-pig, but they were neither man nor pig. Their blubberous masses, much like walruses, choked the tunnels, and their unwholesome sour stench filled his lungs. From that point he ran, and as he ran, nightmarish legions of dread demons and devil toads, stories of child-eating snakes and malignant fairies clawed at his sanity. He remembered little of the run, of his mad dash back into the embrace of the upper world, his incoherent babbling to the wakened farmer folk, his hysterical laughing into the night, pointing at the distant cave, and finally the merciful tapping of his consciousness. By morning, he awoke and demanded to the farmers an empirical need to blast the caves to kingdom come. The farmers were convinced and dynamite all the discovered caverns. The blasting of underground networks apparently shook the earth again, for in Cambigan and Bugdo were felt an equally strong earthquake as the one of October 2013. This quake was registered as a minor one everywhere else in Bahal. The disappearances stopped there and then. Poor Manon Rubin, who was the sole witness of the true horror, had his mind blasted and, to this day, still has dread nightmares of the teeth and pink flesh. He never left Cambigan since, for he swears one or two caves must have been missed, for on certain quiet nights, under the watchful gaze of a full moon, one could hear surreptitious moans, half manlike and half swine, in the dead air of Barangay Cambigan. Story 6, the Merton account. Dear Mr. Valentine, as per your request, I have collected reliable morsels of information from the many and often incoherent accounts that detail the events which transpired in Merton on September 2nd, 1996. It is only with great reluctance that I reveal this information to you, for I fear for my life that I am pursued with the intent of execution. Yet I am a professional, and as such I will hold up my end of this terrible bargain. But I warn you that you may be better off unaware of the events which transpired in Merton on September 2nd, 1996. August 31st, 1996, according to the more reliable sources. even with which corroboration was a cruel goal. The event began on August 31st when the librarian, Miss Laurie LaSalle, came across a leather-bound book called Apocryphex, which she believed to be worth quite a great deal of money, for its binding and contents suggested great age. The book, though I now dread to speak of it, was written in a language which Miss LaSalle could neither understand nor distinguish. Determined to discover its value, she brought to the nearest university, LSU at Shreveport, where she presented it to some of the faculty for appraisal. Among them the varying sources cannot seem to agree between the presence of 3 faculty, or for was Dr. Vance Ridley, who told me in my interview with him in 2004, I felt a deep uneasiness about Apocryphex, and could tell Dr. Smith alias F. felt the same way. I'm not a religious man, but the closest I've come to belief in the spiritual was when I beheld that ancient book, and now I am glad to believe not, though Dr. Smith believes I do so foolishly. According to Dr. Ridley, an authority in cryptanalysis and linguists, the book was written in some perversion of Latin and Occitan. The bastard language was very pleasant to hear, nearly musical, though Dr. Ridley assured me that the translation, though he could only produce a rough one, was not so easy on the ears. The document which contained the translation has since been sent before it could be shipped to me, though Dr. Ridley has told me that the tome was a collection of old alchemical recipes, perhaps written by an Aquitanian monk in the 9th century, though its condition would seem to place it a much more recent date. He assured me that the translation bordered on nonsense, though from out conversations, Mr. Valentine, I am led to believe that you would agree. I am still searching for the translation. September 1st, 1996. On September 1st, early in the morning, Ms. LaSalle retrieved Apocryphex from the university, who warned her to take caution with the book, for it was a priceless artifact, considering its bizarre contents and pristine condition. This information was relayed to many friends of Ms. LaSalle on their September 1st book CLUB meeting. I have spoken with many of those women, and it is from them that I have gathered much of this information regarding Apocryphex, though the current location of the original copy eludes us all. After her book club, which ended around noon, Ms. LaSalle went home and showed the book to her boyfriend, Mr. Gary Rogers, who owns that quaint diner on the bluff near Caddo Lake. Mr. Rogers, excited by the nature of Ms. LaSalle's find, urged her to bring Apocryphex to the citywide picnic to be held near the lake. She agreed to do so. This information regarding Apocryphex cannot be tied directly to the event which would transpire the next day, though the arrival of the old book only 2 days before the event seemed too ominous to ignore, and with this suspicion I present his report. Ms. LaSalle died on September 2nd, 1996, and so I could not question her. Mr. Rogers spoke with me briefly before suggesting I leave the town, which name has since changed, as you know, and which I am obligated not to report here. September 2nd, 1996 at 9 a.m. Then Mayor Frederick Murphy went out to the site of the picnic near Caddo Lake with the wildlife experts and your members of the city council, one of whom still serves to this day. It was a clear day, and the lake was calm. The wildlife experts confirmed that there were no alligators in the area, and Seshu, a monitoring station in the thicket of some nearby trees to watch for any unwanted wildlife that may intrude about the picnic. The city councilman whom I could reach for questioning reported nothing unusual during this precaution. At around 10 a.m., volunteers began setting up tents, tables, and chairs. A local extermination company was hired by the city to treat the area for mosquitoes and did so. Some of the volunteers think that the chemical used to repel and kill the mosquitoes may have somehow been connected with the event. Scattered reports claim there was an altercation between one of the exterminators and volunteers, both of whom were in the process of divorce. None of the exterminators who were present that day still worked there when I reached them for questioning, but the manager, who was only present for the treating and not for the picnic itself, suggested that the volunteers had set up the grill to close to the water's edge. Comments from the former mayor suggests that neither of these reports are reliable, since he recalls a distinct division between the exterminators and volunteers regarding the nature of the divorce. At 10:30 a.m., Merton Pollock. He arrived and began setting up cones. Most of the police officers who were present are now deceased, but one survivor, Officer Daniel Patton, says that nothing seemed out of the ordinary besides having to escort a hysterical woman off of the lot. At 11 a.m., residents of Merton who were taking place in the annual chili competition were allowed to set up their tents. According to Mr. Rogers and a few volunteers, Ms. LaSalle was quite a contender for this event and showed up early to set up her station. Officer Patton reports that there still seemed to be nothing of note occurring at this point. According to Mr. Rogers, she had brought Apocryphex with her. At some point between 11 o'clock and noon, the wildlife experts had to chase away an alligator who had on too close to the lot. According to the wildlife experts, it was rare for alligators to travel so far away from the deeper channels of Caddo Lake, though it certainly wasn't unheard of. Otherwise, they reported nothing of note. At noon, the picnic was officially open to the public. Before 1 o'clock, a good portion of the residents, the population of Merton was for 126 as of 1990, had arrived and begun setting up their areas. Many witnesses report a general uneasiness, though this likely only a sentiment believed to be felt in hindsight. Officer Patton recalls seeing Apocryphex when sampling Ms. LaSalle and Mr. Rogers' chili, but didn't think much of it. This is the last reported sighting of the book before the incident, though Mr. Rogers insists that Ms. LaSalle had shown the book to several people who had stopped by for chili. When pressed for names of people who may have remembered having contact with the book, he could only provide names of individuals who have since passed away. This is where reports began to vary. According to the wildlife experts, there were two alligators swimming quite a distance from the shore who were being closely monitored. According to Officer Patton, reports to the police ranging from 1 to 7 alligators required for most of the Merton police force to be stationed at the shore to Washington. For alligators, most of the residents I interviewed were unaware of the alligators or stated there were none at all. At 1 p.m. on September 2, 1996, disaster struck in Merton, Louisiana. What happened exactly is nearly impossible to say, but I have tried with the utmost meticulousness to string together what seemed to be incoherent and unrelated reports for the sake of clarity, though Buhar believed this to be a laudably hopeless pursuit. Most witnesses recall the picnic being interrupted by what sounded like a large, nearly muted horn above the clouds. This phenomenon has been reported all over the world at various times and has even been documented on video if you are interested in researching it further. These sounds, according to witnesses, were comparable to enormous pieces of machinery grinding together. Next, a few reports claim that a swift wave swept over the lake, but the wildlife experts watching the lake disagree that this ever happened. The horn sounds ended abruptly, and many witnesses recall, often with a shiver or a reflective sigh, the brief and stunned silence that settled over them. Then the waterfront erupted in noise. The police officers began firing into the water. Panicked Officer Patton claims that one of the officers screamed and began firing into the water, leading to a sort of hysteria amongst them. Once the firing began, he quickly left his post to make sure the residents didn't get hurt in the panic. Most witnesses attempted to flee once the gunfire began, but some faced the water to determine what the threat was. Scattered reports say that an alligator emerged from the water to grab one of the officers. Whatever the case, it was only moments after the firing began that an impossibly large wave burst from Caddo and swept the officers into the lake. The water rose so rapidly that it flooded around half of the picnic site and swept many residents, including Ms. LaSalle, off of their feet. Many were dragged into the lake when the wave receded. Witnesses report that dozens rushed in to try and help those being washed towards the water when a second and possibly large and rapidly forming wave crashed over the picnic, this time covering a wider area. One witness who was swept into the water recalled with bitter tears, screaming as those trying to swim back to the shore were dragged under the surface of the lake by powerful jaws. In the horror of the frenzy, many witnesses, guided by Officer Patton, fled to the parking lot. Officer Patton returned to the scene to find a horrific mass of writhing bodies, hoping against hope itself to reach dry land. The water was red from blood, and swimming calmly between the wildly thrashing figures were the scaly spines of reptilian predators. A third, though some insist it was the fourth wave, washed over the scene and dragged many more of the citizens and officers into the depths of the lake, where massive jaws were bursting forth from beneath the water and crushing flesh and bone before dragging the helpless victims below the surface. Finally, 6 survivors clambered to the shore, where they were treated by Officer Patton and a medical team who had now arrived. Witnesses report that after the survivors had escaped, there was an eerie silence which seemed to last for several minutes. Though the water was dark red from the blood of the slain, no bodies or even articles of clothing were ever recovered from the lake. The incident was so crushing that most of the witnesses left Merton, which would later be renamed. Of the 6 survivors, 1 committed suicide, 2 were admitted into mental institutes, 1 joined a cult, and once died of cancer 2 years later. The event was never published in any paper, and those who died in the incident were said to have died of natural causes. You and I both know, of course, how detestably unnatural this entire ordeal was. Perhaps the most disturbing detail of all came from the wildlife experts who were safe in their perch across the lake In a mass of swampy foliage, alligators were watching the carnage intently, though the experts claim that no alligators ever neared the shore. Worst of all, the experts tell me, is that no alligators were present during the attack at all. Mr. Valentine, I beseech you not to look an. Why further into the matter? One of the eyewitnesses I interviewed has since sent me several death threats, and has made claims so wild that I dare not publish them in this report. Please, sir, if you value your life and your sanity, be satisfied with the account I have provided you, and above all, please do not seek after apocryphics. I am a professional, and as such have fulfilled my contract with you. I will not further investigate the events which transpired in Merton on September 2nd, 1996, lest I suffer a fate worse than the now constant terror that grips me even as I write this letter. God bless you, sir, and God help us all. Story 7. Deadly Trick-or-Treating. Part 1. Halloween, 1999. It was Halloween night. In the year 1999, I was 10 years old. In the 5th grade, I lived in a town in New Hampshire, and I had 3 best friends who I will refer to as Allison, Emma, and Meredith in this story. On Halloween night, we all met up at my house. Then we set off on a trick-or-treating adventure in our neighborhood. Our goal was to go to lots of houses and collect as much candy as we could. This year, all of our parents let us go out on our own, as us for girls on an adventure on Halloween night. Everything went well. We collected lots of candy, and we really enjoyed ourselves. The 4 of us realized it was getting pretty late, and a major ITY of the trick-or-treaters had already gone home. By this point, Halloween was on a Sunday that year, which meant that we all had to go home and get to bed so we'd be ready for school. The next day, we began to head in the direction of our houses, which were all pretty close together. As we were walking down a dark street, we saw somebody come out from behind a tree. The person was quite tall, and they were wearing a ghost face costume from the Scream movies. We thought it was just some older kid trying to give us girls a scare. All of us brushed it off and continued on our way. As we continued heading home, I happened to glance behind me and noticed the same guy we saw by the tree. He was following us. I whispered to my friends that the creepy guy was behind us and urged them to walk faster to try and get away. Emma, who was the tough, brave girl in our group, decided to turn around and confront this mysterious guy. She called him a creep and asked what the hell he was doing. Then the guy pulled something out from under his cape. I realized it was a small pocket knife. All of a sudden, he started running towards us. The 4 started to run like hell away from this crazy person. It seriously felt like we were in a horror film. We continued to run as fast as our legs would carry us, and we never looked back for a second. Eventually we lost him. We all sat down to take a breather, and we were glad we had outrun this creep. Then I realized something. There were only 3 of us now. It was me, Allison, and Meredith, but Emma was nowhere to be seen. We thought maybe Emma had ran off in a different direction than we did. Our minds tried not to jump to the worst-case scenario, that the creep had captured our friend and did something horrible to her. Just then we saw somebody limping towards us. It was Emma. we noticed she had blood running down her right leg. She told us that the guy had grabbed her and took her behe and some trees. He stabbed her leg, but she punched him in the face and got away. Like I said, Emma was the tough girl in the group, and she wasn't one to be messed with. Then something happened while Emma was telling her story of how she fought off the creepy, knife-wielding guy. She collapsed to the ground. We then noticed that she had a gaping stab wound on her lower back. Apparently, the guy must have stabbed her while she was trying to fight him off. Emma was unconscious, and we thought she had just died in front of us. We ran to the nearest house we saw that had front porch lights on. We frantically rang the doorbell, and an older man came out of the house. We told him that our friend had been injured and needed an ambulance. The man came with us, while he told his wife to call the police. The man helped us carry Emma back to the house, and we all waited there for an ambulance to arrive. Within 5 minutes, the ambulance arrived and took Emma to the hospital. The police also showed up, and one of the officers questioned Allison, Meredith, and I about what happened to our friend. We told him that a guy in a ghost face costume started following us, then ran after us with a knife. We said that he stabbed Emma while she was struggling to get away from him. The officer took our statement. Shortly after, all of our parents arrived to the scene. They were all worried, sick, as we had been gone for several hours, and it was well past all of our bedtimes. We all went home and prayed that Emma would be all right. So there's good news and bad news. The good news is that Emma survived. She had to stay in the hospital for a little while, but she eventually made a full recovery. Emma and her parents moved away towards the end of the year, mostly due to the fact that their only child was nearly murdered on Halloween night in a town that was considered to be very safe and almost never had any violent crimes take place. Although Emma appeared to be brave and tough about the incident on the outside, on the inside, she was terrified and very shaken up about it. The bad news is that the police didn't find the crazy guy who chased us when and nearly murdered our friend. After we gave them our statement on Halloween, they conducted an investigation to try and track down the guy who was responsible. However, there wasn't enough evidence to charge anybody. The police urged the people in our town to be very cautious when traveling the streets late at night. Part to Halloween 2000. It had been exactly 1 year since the terrifying ordeal we went through last Halloween. I was still close with Allison and Meredith. I still kept in contact with Emma, who was now living in Pennsylvania. We were now in the 6th grade in middle school, and we were getting ready to go trick-or-treating. Again, this year we were extra cautious, as were all the other children in our neighborhood who went trick-or-treating that night. My friends and I decided to go trick-or-treating earlier this year and to not stay out for too late this time. Nothing bad happened this year. No knife-wielding creeps trying to kill us or anything like that. The next morning I saw something terrifying on the local news. There was a report about a 10-year-old girl who had disappeared while she was out trick-or-treating the previous night. Allison, Meredith, and I were all scared, and the memories of the horrors we went through last Halloween hit us like a ton of bricks. A few days later, a headless body was found in a creek. The remains could be identified, but the police speculated that the remains belonged to the girl who disappeared on Halloween night, as the remains appeared to be those of a young girl who was between 9 to 10 years of age. We decided to not tell Emma anything about what happened, as we did not want to trigger bad memories for her. However, Emma called us up later that day and asked if we were all right. She had heard about what happened from a friend of her parents that lived in our town. The police conducted another investigation, but this time the killer was found a few days after the girl's body. As discovered, a teenage girl came into the town's police station. She told officers that her boyfriend had what appeared to be a real decomposing human hid in his basement. The police searched the boyfriend's house and discovered the severed head. The head was positively identified from dental records as the young girl who had gone missing on Halloween night. The police also found other disturbing things, like the bloody remains of dead cats, dogs, and other animals. The police now knew who was responsible for the murder, and the boyfriend was arrested. The killer was a 19-year-old man. When the police questioned him, he talked about killing the young girl with joy and pleasure. He also said that a voice told him that every Halloween he has to kill a young child or something horrible would happen to him. He said that he almost killed a little girl the year before, but she got away from him. That girl was our friend, Emma. Now we all knew the identity of the guy who terrorized us on Halloween in 1999. We're grateful that Emma lived, but we felt so awful for the poor girl who didn't survive. The man was going to be charged with second-degree murder and one count of attempted murder, but he was acquitted by reason of insanity and placed in a mental institution somewhere in New Hampshire. My friends and I were relieved to know that this sick psychopath was now locked up. We continued living out our childhood days, but we never forgot about the Halloween horrors he experienced. Part 3, Present Day, 2017. It's been 18 years since the terrifying ordeal we went through as kids. I'm now 28 years old and living a big city life in NYC. I'm still in contact with Allison and Meredith through social media. Sadly, we lost Emma last year on Halloween. She committed suicide after many years of battling severe depression and anxiety. Allison and I decided to come back to our hometown in New Hampshire for a visit. While we were there, we met up with Meredith, who still resides in our hometown. We started reminiscing about our childhood memories and the terrifying events we endured on Halloween back in 1999 and 2000 came up in the conversation. Thankfully, there have been no violent crimes in our hometown since then, and the town is once again considered to be a safe community. The next day, I left to go back home to New York City. Allison stayed there for a few extra days with her family. I said my goodbyes to my childhood friends and went back home. A few weeks later, the day after Halloween, I got a phone call from Allison. She had terrible news. Meredith was found brutally murdered in her apartment in our New Hampshire hometown. I was in complete shock, horror, and disbelief. I simply couldn't believe somebody did that to Meredith. Unfortunately, it was real. Meredith was now gone, along with Emma, two of my best friends in childhood, now dead. It was strange that both of them died on the exact same day, just 1 year apart. Even though Emma's death was ruled as a suicide, I'm still very suspicious, and thinking this might not be just a coincidental thing. My fears were confirmed later that day. When I returned home, I walked into my NYC apartment and fell back in horror. There was a bloody message written on my wall that read, "You're next." I turned the corner to go into the living room, and I fell back in horror once again when I saw my dead cat hanging from the ceiling fan. My sweet cat had been gutted, and that frightening message on the wall had been written in his blood. I called the police, but there wasn't a whole lot they could do other than determine that my apartment had been broken into. They said they'd try to figure out who might be behind this, but I already knew who it was. I knew the person responsible was that sick lunatic who terrorized my friends and I when we were children. I'm guessing he must have escaped the mental institution, and now he's back to finish what he started 18 years ago. I think that night he had planned on killing all four of us girls. Now he's out of the institution and killing my friends. First was Emma, then Meredith, and apparently I next, probably followed by Allison. Then his murderous rage will be complete when all of us are dead. He has only murdered people on Halloween, so I'm assuming he'll be back for me next Halloween. I have no idea how this sick psycho found out where I live. Needless to say, I'm absolutely terrified, and I don't know what I should do now. I'm seriously considering changing my identity, or even leaving the country just to get away from this psychopath. I'm advising Allison to do the same since he's after her too. All I can do now is pray that this psycho will find me and somebody will find him and put him back where he belongs so he won't terrorize anyone ever again.